So guys, before we get into today's video, I want to tell you all about the sponsor of today's video, which is June's Journey. June's Journey is a free mobile game that you can download on any app store, and it is set all the way back in time in the 1920s. What I really love about June's Journey is just how therapeutic it feels when I'm playing it. I feel like with its vintage aesthetic, I can just get lost for hours playing this game wherever I am. In June's Journey, there is a whole story that you get to follow, which involves solving all sorts of different crimes. And in order to solve all of these mysterious crimes, you have to search to find lots of hidden items. But that's not your only purpose. You also get to decorate this big mansion as you go along with the points that you earn. So if you're like me and spend hours on Pinterest looking at interior decor ideas, then this game is going to be perfect for you. The game is available on iOS, Android, and desktop via Facebook Games. So if you need a new way to pass the time and relax while also taking a step back in time, check out June's Journey from the link in my description.
Rachel wasn't someone to just disappear.
A premeditated murder.
We knew something was wrong.
To actually want to kill the role model.
So I mean, that's crazy.
Have you ever felt envy or jealousy toward a friend? Perhaps their looks, grades, or financial situation made you feel like they had the higher ground. What did you do? Break it off slowly or change your negative mindset? Either way, I'm sure you didn't do what Caroline Reed Robertson did.
This is, without doubt, one of the most bizarre homicides that I'm aware of or have worked on. It is skin-crawling, chillingly cold, calculated murder.
Back in 1999, Melbourne was shocked to hear about Caroline's 5-year-long plan. It was truly terrifying, especially for a 19-year-old girl. It involved murder, lust, and a strong desire to steal her younger neighbor's identity. I have to warn you guys, today's case is pretty twisted, and if you're easily triggered by police incompetence, this is not the case for you. But if you're ready, let's watch on and find out Caroline's disturbing motivation and Rachel Barber's tragic story. Our story begins on September 12th, 1983, the day Rachel Barber was born to parents Michael and Elizabeth. Rachel grew up in Melbourne, Australia, along with her parents and 2 younger sisters, Ashley and Heather.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Rachel.
Rachel was a part of a big, happy family. But not just that, she was a part of a group of passionate artists. In her family, there was a designer, a toy maker, a children's author, and a visual artist. Needless to say, Rachel took the arts at a very young age. Her strongest passion was ballet dancing.
Ballet was always her first passion, and Rachel would come home at the end of the day and our whole house would be dismantled, and I just accepted that. And she'd get all her dress-ups out and she would just improvise, and there would be full-on performances.
Rachel's favorite activity was choreographing dance movements and having her little sisters star in them. Ever since primary school, she was confident dancing was going to be her career, and her family never questioned it. After all, Elizabeth would play classical music to Rachel when she was still in the womb. And with ballet, work really does start early. Rachel started her ballet classes at the Melbourne Dance Academy when she was about 6 years old, and she never gave up her dream. By the time she started high school, she was a prolific junior dancer, and she was also enrolled in a modeling course. When she was 14, she appeared in women's fitness magazines. But around the same time, Rachel started having a difficult conversation with her parents. She wanted to drop out of school so she could attend the dance factory full-time. As you probably know, dance takes a lot of practice, and just doing it a couple of hours after classes won't put you at the top of your game. Her family was reluctant at first. If she ever changed her mind, it would be too late to go back to high school and pursue any other career. But Rachel had been passionate about dancing since she could walk, and they remembered this. So by the end of her freshman year in 1998, Rachel transferred to the dance factory. It was her dream come true. The dance factory is also where Rachel met her first boyfriend, Manny Corella. The two quickly became lovers and best friends. They shared a lifelong passion and had very similar worldviews. Although Rachel appeared to be the life of the party, she was actually quite shy when she was out in the public. But whenever she was surrounded by her friends, she would shine. Sadly, her light would stop shining all too soon. On March 1st, 1999, Rachel's day started just like any other. Around 9 a.m., she kissed her mom goodbye and got in the car with her dad.
She waited for her father and then she was fine, and then they went off and she waved goodbye. She said, "I love you" at the end, and that was the morning.
He would take her to the Riversdale Road and Elgar Road tram station, where she would get on the tram to her friend's house. Her friend's house in Richmond was a sort of hub where all the dance students would meet up and have breakfast before heading to the dance factory together.
I'm gonna put my makeup on today.
That morning, Rachel hugged everyone, including her boyfriend. She also gave Manny a gift, a little purple heart with a ribbon on it. It seemed like a pretty perfect morning for any 15-year-old, and it would get even more perfect. At least, that's what Rachel thought. That morning, she was beaming. She was telling all her dance colleagues that evening she was going to make a lot of money. She didn't tell them how, it was a surprise, but she had a plan and she was very excited about it. During her lunch break, Rachel went out to lunch with Manny. When they walked past a shoe store, Rachel showed Manny a pair of $100 shoes that she'd really wanted for a while. She said she told her mom that they were way over her budget, but that she would finally be able to afford them as she was about to make a lot of cash. But when Manny asked how, Rachel wouldn't tell him. This seemed pretty weird. Usually Rachel was honest and blunt, especially with her boyfriend. When Manny insisted on his questions, Rachel just said she was going to meet an old girlfriend of hers. She had a job for her, but it was all pretty hush-hush. Fair enough, Manny thought. Girl stuff is girl stuff, right? So after dance classes were over at 5:30 p.m., Rachel and her friends started walking towards the tram station on Church Street. But when they stopped there, Rachel said that day she was going to take a different tram. So she kissed Manny goodbye and walked on to the Waltham station. She would take the tram in the opposite direction of her home to meet an old friend at her flat. But at 6:30 p.m. that day, Elizabeth would start to get worried about her daughter. She was making dinner with Rachel's younger sisters while she was waiting for Michael and Rachel to come home. As per usual, Michael was supposed to pick Rachel up from the local tram station at 6 or 6:15. But time flew by and there was no sign. The dinner was getting cold, and the younger girls were asking where their older sister was.
When did you start to feel something was wrong?
I knew instantly. I knew, because I just had that gut feeling, because it wasn't Rachel. Rachel wasn't someone to just disappear. There's no way that she'd want to run away or anything like that. It just wasn't her. So my instinct was she was dead that night.
Elizabeth didn't know what to tell them. She was putting on a brave face for her children. Perhaps Rachel had missed her tram, or Michael had stopped to get fuel, she would say. But 7 turned to 7:30, to 7:40. At first, Michael wasn't answering his phone. Then, Elizabeth got a distressing phone call. Michael was in Blackburn at his parents' house. He didn't find Rachel at the tram stop, nor was she answering his phone. He asked Elizabeth if Rachel had gone home on her own, but she hadn't.
When Michael rang me up and said Rachel wasn't at the tram stop, I was panicking. And you think, why? Why panic? She's 15, but we knew something was wrong because she wasn't home.
Michael had driven by all the local tram stops, and now he was checking his family home, desperate for a positive outcome. But Rachel was nowhere to be found, so her parents immediately contacted the media. They showed Rachel's face on missing posters and urged people to come forward with any relevant information. They were pretty sure it was foul play. Rachel was afraid of being out on her own, and she was also afraid of the dark. In the past, there were a few instances where creepy men followed her into shops, so Rachel was overly cautious when it came to walking by herself. This is why Michael would still drive her to the tram stop every morning. So the Barber family knew all too well that Rachel hadn't run away on her own. But when they called the police to tell them about this, the officers almost seemed to mock them. They said all teenagers come home within 48 hours. They're just out for an adventure, and when they get hungry or scared, eventually they return. What? How could they dismiss the potential danger Rachel was in? Desperate to solve the case anyway, Elizabeth started phoning Rachel's friends. She started with Manny. He usually knew everything Rachel was up to. Indeed, Manny gave Elizabeth a little clue into Rachel's last hours. He said, "Oh, I thought she wouldn't go." Elizabeth said, "Where?" So Manny told her about the old girlfriend Rachel said she was seeing for a quick cash-earning job. Then Elizabeth remembered. A few months back, Rachel's former neighbor and babysitter, Caroline, had contacted her, offering a modeling job that could earn her a hefty sum of money. But when Rachel told her mom about it, she said no. She was too young to take these kinds of gigs. It was simply too risky. So on February 28th, Caroline tried again, but made sure Rachel kept this job a secret from her mother, who didn't understand her. But her mom did understand her, and on the morning of March 1st, she had a strange feeling about Rachel.
I said, "You're up to something." I said, "What are you up to?" And it was almost there, and she said nothing.
Rachel could have talked to her mom right there and then. That would have saved her life. Tragically, it was her trust in people and overall kindness that led Rachel to her horrible death. Now, Elizabeth knew that Rachel had taken a modeling job that evening, but she didn't know who had offered it. She had been really secretive to her friends too, so no matter who Elizabeth called, she couldn't get a name. She just knew Rachel had taken a different tram in a direction opposite her home. Meanwhile, Michael went to Box Hill Police Station and filed an official missing persons report. Even now, the officers insisted he shouldn't worry about it. So on the evening of March 1st, Elizabeth and Michael drove all around Melbourne, asking people if they'd seen their daughter. It was clear the police weren't helping, but looking for Rachel in Melbourne was literally looking for a needle in a haystack. So the next morning, Rachel's parents walked into the police station once more. This time they had a stack of photos of their daughter. But when they spoke to the officer on duty, they found out he hadn't been told about a missing persons report. So the officers on March 1st cared so little, they didn't even bother to pass on the information. That day, Michael and Elizabeth went over to the dance factory and investigated Rachel's locker, again taking the role of the police officers. But inside, they found nothing. Well, her wallet was in there, but in it was just some small change and a tram ticket from the day before. There were no clues as to where she might have gone or who she might have met the day before. Then Michael and Elizabeth went to the shoe store that Rachel loved so much. They remembered that Rachel wanted a pair of expensive shoes, so they wanted to see if she'd bought them. The shop attendant told them that Rachel had actually asked them to put a pair on hold and told them she would return the next day to buy them, but she never did. As her parents kept showing her picture to other shop assistants, they heard something awful. There was a convicted felon, freshly out of prison, who had recently opened an illegal brothel in the area. Even more distressingly, he was convicted for exploiting young girls for illegal street work. Another shop assistant said he literally witnessed Rachel being asked by one of the brothel crew if she wanted to join them, promising her big money. Rachel had said no, but imagine how the jigsaw was falling into place. Rachel had told Manny she was going to make a good sum of money, but she wouldn't tell him how. Then this felon was out looking for teens. Rachel's parents' hearts sank, but they knew the brothel was the next place to check out, so they called the place, asking if Rachel was working there. The brothel gave a series of confusing answers. They said, first of all, they never recruit people off the streets, and second of all, Rachel had never come in contact with them. What had that shop assistant seen? Was he lying? The more Elizabeth and Michael searched for answers, the more questions they would get. On the evening of March 2nd, the Barbers entered the Richmond police station, hoping for more helpful officers. But bureaucracy is a piece of work. Richmond officers said that Rachel's missing person case had already been filed at the Box Hill office, so they couldn't start an investigation on their own. And when they called Melbourne hospitals asking if they had a patient called Rachel Barber, the hospitals said they couldn't give out private information to random callers. Imagine how infuriating all of this must feel for Rachel's family. By March 3rd, the dance factory staff and the cafe next to it were involved in finding Rachel. The academy staff had filed several missing persons reports to the Box Hill police, hoping to jumpstart the investigation. And the cafe owner had a friend who was a good detective. He went to the Box Hill police station to try and convince the officers to take charge. Meanwhile, Rachel's family, friends, and Manny helped put up posters of her all over town. But even though the police officers promised the detective they would start an investigation, they never did. When Elizabeth spoke to the detective again, he decided to help them out on his own. So he asked Elizabeth to make a list of everyone Rachel knew, especially girls she knew. On March 4th, the police did do something, but it was incredibly stupid. Their theory was that Rachel had gotten pregnant, so she ran away, or that Manny, who got her pregnant, got mad and took her life. So they took Manny in for questioning, but it was pretty clear Manny wasn't with Rachel at the time of her disappearance. And when the police spoke to Rachel's family, they assured him Rachel would tell them if she was pregnant. They were very close and she wouldn't run off instead of talking to her family. Later that day, a witness said she saw Rachel with 2 other girls at East Richmond Station. The police checked the CCTV, and that was not Rachel. Then another witness said she saw Rachel 3 days after her disappearance with a blonde-haired man. The police didn't check this one though. They just said they solved the case. Rachel was a typical teenage runaway. Again, the Barbers had to insist this was unlike their daughter. The police really had to do their jobs. So an officer came to their house and looked through Rachel's room. He concluded that Rachel had run off and advised her parents to go to counseling and focus on their other 2 daughters. Honestly, how can a police officer say this to a family who doesn't know where their daughter is? It gets even more outrageous. As Rachel's parents made a list of suspicious individuals in their close circle, they thought of a creepy guy in their neighborhood. This was a man who Elizabeth often caught creeping around their house and talking to her girls. Just 2 weeks before Rachel's disappearance, Elizabeth was just walking out of the shower when she found this man inside their house, talking to her youngest daughters. Sheesh. She kicked him out of the house, told him to never return, and reported him to the police. On March 6th, Elizabeth and Michael went to the Box Hill police station and inquired about this man. So the officers told them to find another place to go, as they'd wasted enough of their time already. Wait, what? Elizabeth broke down crying and she threw her bag at the police car. She was at her wit's end. She didn't know what else to do. This was 101 police incompetence, and their lack of kindness and professionalism was tearing her apart. But later that day, someone called her. It was Allison, the older sister of one of Rachel's friends. She'd just found out that Rachel was missing, and she thought she'd share a little detail she remembered from March 1st. She'd seen Rachel at the Prahran tram station, close to Richmond. She was together with another girl. She was maybe a little bit older than her, but otherwise looked very plain. This was not a little detail. It was the vital clue that opened the doors to Rachel's case. Her family knew it too. So they took Allison and went over to the police station, where Allison drew a sketch of the girl she'd seen with Rachel. The Barber family also made a public appeal.
She's gone somewhere that she thought was legit. That's my gut feeling.
We want Rachel back. She's missed. We love her.
Soon enough, Australia's Most Wanted featured Rachel in their magazine, and Allison's sketch was shown to the public. But the Barbers couldn't identify who it was from Allison's sketch. Still, it was a familiar face. In fact, it was an all too familiar face that the Barbers had known for almost a decade. Caroline Reed Robertson. The Robertsons became the Barbers' neighbors back in 1992. There were a few odd similarities between the 2 families. Both had 3 daughters. Caroline and Rachel were the eldest. They lived across the street from each other, so it sounds like the 6 girls would have been the best of friends. But it was nothing like that. When you actually looked inside the homes, the families were nothing like each other.
On the face of it, Caroline was fine. She had a quiet personality, but what happens inside her house is often not seen outside of the house.
Caroline's parents were fighting violently every single day. They were getting ready for a divorce, but they weren't ready for it yet. So all their anger and frustration could be heard constantly by their 3 daughters. Caroline was unhappy with herself. She was overweight. Her skin was going through that awful teenage phase, and her family was seriously stressful. But every time she looked out her window, she saw an idyllic family and a happy, beautiful girl called Rachel.
She clearly saw Rachel as the ideal person, as the person she wanted.
Yeah, and this is the whole silly thing, because if Rachel had been told that Caroline saw her as a perfect person, Rachel would have laughed about that herself. Because nobody's perfect, and Rachel wasn't perfect.
The first time Caroline met Rachel in person, she was 15 and Rachel was 10. Rachel's family had hired her to babysit their girls while they were out. What could go wrong? If anything, they expected the Barber girls to love Caroline like an older sister. But they didn't foresee Caroline's creepy obsession. She couldn't get Rachel out of her head. She found her very attractive, but she hated that she was everything she wasn't.
I think that Caroline was very unhappy with herself. She didn't like the way she looked. She did want to take on that persona of someone that was happy, that was beautiful, that was popular, like Rachel was.
Indeed, Caroline didn't just want to be around Rachel. She wanted to be Rachel, steal her identity, and become her in every way imaginable.
You and I can sit here and say, well, that's just not possible, but certainly that's what she wanted to do, and that is absolutely my belief of why she took Rachel's life.
To steal Rachel's identity, she would have to kill her.
Some people might change their behaviour, their appearance, their job, their lifestyle, so they can be like their role model, but to actually want to kill the role model and replace them, I mean, that's going really a long way.
Caroline's horrific plan began the first time she met Rachel. That's right. For 5 long years, Caroline planned Rachel's demise. In her head, she could simply take her life and become her. This is what Caroline wrote in her diary.
I don't fit anywhere in this crazy world because I am ugly.
Caroline's mother, Gail, was desperate. She saw her daughter in the terrible mental state she was in and even asked Elizabeth for advice.
I had Gail crying on my shoulder. My clothes were saturated with Gail's tears for her grief over worry for her daughter. And she said, I can't do anything. I'd say, take her to see somebody. And she said, I've tried that. She doesn't want to go.
If only the mothers knew what was going on inside Caroline's mind, but she kept her thoughts to herself. The only proof was in her diaries, full of nasty expressions like obese pizza face that she would use to describe herself. Her only escape from self-loathing was her fantasy of becoming Rachel Barber.
Rachel is strikingly attractive. Dancer's body, very clear, pale skin, hypnotic green eyes, wild, free spirit, passionate, charming, moody, mysterious.
Well, sometimes you start off with a process of fantasizing, and then, that compulsion becomes stronger and stronger. And then if you don't start acting on it, then you just feel this terrible discomfort. And that's what motivates people to do things that they shouldn't be doing.
Still, the Barbers were blissfully unaware of her horrible fantasy.
We were living our lives, they were living theirs. So we were oblivious to anything that Caroline could have been planning. Rachel would have been spied on quite a few times because she was keeping an eye on Rachel a lot.
Caroline spent all her free time spying on Rachel, gathering photos of her, and putting them on her walls. Once, she convinced Rachel to photograph her for a school project. These photos just became her creepy shrine.
That's scary. I mean, that's scary that, she had photos of all of us girls all over her walls. I mean, that's crazy.
But in 1998, Caroline's fantasy seemed to come to a bitter end. The Barbers moved houses. As far as the Barbers were concerned, this was the end of their daughter's odd little friendship with Caroline Robertson. But as far as Caroline was concerned, this was just the beginning of her plan. As soon as she graduated from high school, she moved to a rented apartment in Prahran. She didn't get a job or apply to university. Her whole time was dedicated to killing Rachel.
She was thinking about this for a couple of years, or even if she wasn't thinking about it, it was in her subconscious. One of the homicide detectives sadly said that he really honestly believed Rachel's days were numbered.
By 1999, Caroline didn't have a conscience anymore. She didn't really have any reasoning either. How could she think she could replace someone by taking their life? There's something really sad about psychopathic killers.
With people who lack conscience, they will see the victim as someone who, by their own fault, is in the wrong place at the wrong time and deserve what they get. If you're that naive and you fall for my trap, then, you know, that's your fault. This is the kind of logic that I've heard over and over.
This is why Caroline had no remorse for what she did. On March 1st, 1999, she convinced Rachel to take a modeling job for $100. Because she'd tried it in January too, and Rachel's mom opposed the idea, this time she made Rachel promise she wouldn't tell anyone about the job. So after her dance classes, Rachel headed over to the tram station where she met Caroline. She lured Rachel into her flat, invited her to do a few yoga relaxation poses, and then strangled her from behind. Rachel had no idea why Caroline wanted to take her life. She had never suspected her. Just like the rest of the Barber family, she saw Caroline as a quiet, maybe odd girl. Her obsession had been a secret up until this point. Now Caroline had done the worst thing imaginable, but she didn't have a plan on what to do next. Her story would end quickly, just like Rachel's. After Allison gave the police her sketch of Caroline, the investigators tracked Rachel's last phone calls on the day of March 1st. When two of them matched a phone number from Prahran, they knew that was their suspect. So enough, they identified the phone number as Caroline Reed Robertson's.
At that point, very cruelly so, Michael actually believed that she was alive. And he thought, for whatever reason, Rachel was with Caroline, but the important thing would be that she would be alive, that she hadn't been kidnapped, that she hadn't been raped. All the dreadful things that you could possibly ever imagine happened to your daughter, we had visualised.
About a week after Rachel's death, the police knocked on Caroline's door. When she didn't answer, they barged in with a warrant for her arrest. They found her unconscious on the floor. She'd had an epileptic seizure. Rachel was nowhere to be found, so the officers rushed Caroline to the hospital. 2 hours later, she was awake. If you still didn't think Caroline was a psychopathic killer, listen to what she first told the cop who interviewed her.
I asked her where Rachel was, and she responded to me that Rachel was dead. And that surprised me. And I said, you know, are you sure she's dead? And she said, yes, I've buried her. And I said, listen, are you sure? Are you sure that she's dead? Is there no way we can help her? And she told me that she'd buried Rachel on a family country property near where she'd buried other pets.
Caroline didn't show any emotion whatsoever. No remorse, no guilt, or even fear that she would be going to prison. The police had more than a confession from Caroline. Her flat was filled with pictures of Rachel, and inside her diary was a carefully designed plan to kill her and steal her identity. She even had a copy of her birth certificate. She had been planning this for 5 years, and the officers could see it clearly for the first time.
There is evidence of planning. Caroline clearly planned this out. This was a premeditated murder.
70 kilometers away from Melbourne, the police officers found Caroline's countryside family home. Rachel's body was buried in a shallow grave in a wooded area. It was very badly decomposed. Now, the Barbers could finally learn the horrible truth about their missing daughter.
Neil sat in front of us and he said, there's no other way of saying this. Rachel's been murdered.
When the officers revealed the murder, the family wasn't surprised.
I was shocked, but not surprised, really, in any way.
Elizabeth just wondered why Rachel didn't fight back. However, they realized the deed was done, and they would never see their daughter again. For the police, this was just a twist in the case. The story was far from over.
You've gone from missing person to murder.
Yes, absolutely.
They took Caroline from the hospital to the police station and proceeded to interrogate her, but she wouldn't say anything.
Caroline's very cold, very matter of fact, but just very cold. There's no emotion there whatsoever.
She acted like she didn't remember the details of the murder, but it was clear to the cops she was just doing this to not incriminate herself further. The less she said, the more she had a chance at getting a lighter sentence. However, Caroline's diary and Rachel's remains were enough to convict her of first-degree murder. And on March 13th, Caroline was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 2015, Caroline Reed Robertson was released on parole at the age of 35. When Elizabeth saw a picture of her today, she noticed how eerie it is that Caroline looks a bit like Rachel now. Caroline has been in a long-term relationship with a former prisoner called Annette Taylor, and it seems like she has turned her life around. But seems is a powerful word, and for the Barber family, Rachel's tragic story will never be forgotten. Still, they choose to stay strong and remember the good side of things.
When Rachel was murdered, her life couldn't have been better. And she was at a point where she totally believed in herself, that she was doing her dancing and everything was going to be right for her.
It's a perspective that helps the family heal, but they will never forget Rachel was 15 when her life was brutally taken away from her. Thanks for watching, you guys. Hey, don't be shy, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time and stay safe.